All right, it looks like this is being recorded now. And so in the interest of time, I am going to get this started. Right. Sorry. All right. I'm trying to see if I can see myself as I do this. So I'm sure that I'm not blocking any of the content. I'm not sure if it's working. But we are just going to keep rolling. All right, so here is the program year 2022 IHCDA EAP operations and policy changes. As part of this training, we are going to be going over some operations updates, some policy changes, and finally I'll be reviewing some of the changes to forms. And we will start with the operations updates. And the first thing I want to review is just what our program operations timeline is going to be. So this is meant to be kind of a comprehensive overview of some of the very important dates that we need to observe. So the official start of the program year is going to be October 1st, 2021, as usual. We are this year allowing the LSPs to distribute applications to at-risk households beginning on Monday, September 13th, 2021. And then from that date until September 26th, so for those 2 weeks, you will be able to evaluate your at-risk household applications for completeness and kind of get them in order and prepare them for data entry until September 26th. However, because of a lot of the enhancements that are being made to EAPCONNECT, particularly with regards to water, that data entry can't actually begin until September 27th. And then beginning Friday, October 1st, you'll be able to distribute applications to any of your non-at-risk households. That's also the date that the online application portal will be opening to all applicants. If you are conducting in-person appointments this year, you may start setting those appointments beginning October 1st, provided that the appointments are not set for any earlier than to actually take place before November 1st. And also beginning October 1st, you may begin issuing incomplete letters to applicants with incomplete applications. Please note that this does not include any of the approval or denial notifications. Now, the official start of the statewide energy assistance program will be Monday, November 1st. This is the day where you may begin conducting in-person appointments, taking walk-in crisis. You may begin issuing benefit approval or denial notification letters to applicants in addition to those incomplete notification letters. You may begin making verbal or written pledges to utility vendors or fuel providers. You may begin sending transmittals to utility vendors or fuel providers. You may begin issuing crisis checks in-house to biofuel households in crisis or wood vouchers for households purchasing biofuel from a vendor with whom you have an MOA. And this is also the date on which you may begin submitting executed transmittals to IHCDA fiscal for payment. The statewide utility shutoff moratorium will begin on Wednesday, December 1st. As of this date, applicants are granted protection from utility disconnect by non-bulk fuel utility vendors upon successful submission of an application for energy assistance until such time as household eligibility has been determined. However, unless you have already determined eligibility, in order to get that protection, the LSP must notify utility vendors of a household's application if they are aware that a household is facing imminent disconnection, provided that you're not able to immediately determine eligibility. If you do document this notification in the client file, please note that this will count as crisis mitigation within that crisis timeline. However, also note that notifying the vendor does not relieve the LSP of the responsibility to prioritize eligibility determination of households that are presenting with an energy crisis. Basically, we do want to use that clause in the moratorium legislation that says that that the applicant must be protected from shutoff while the LSP is determining the eligibility, but we don't want to abuse that clause and basically make it take 55 days to determine that eligibility. I think we do have a responsibility as a good partner to the utility vendors to still try to determine that eligibility in a reasonable amount of time. Unless service is already disconnected and the benefit is insufficient to restore service, the LSPs must waive the requirement for a client contribution during moratorium because continued service will be guaranteed by moratorium protection. However, you may and probably should encourage a client contribution if the amount of the benefit is not going to cover the entire amount due. And vendors who indicate that they do not intend to observe moratorium protection, first step there would be that you should remind them of their legislative requirement to do so. We are going to be holding a vendor webinar this year, so we will be reminding them of the requirements of the moratorium, and it's also in their MOA. However, if a vendor continues to indicate that will not observe moratorium, please just escalate that to us. You can kind of make that initial reminder, but if they continue to not hear what you're saying, just please pass it along to us and allow us to address it with the vendor directly. Now that utility shutoff moratorium will end at 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, March 15th. So on that date, utility vendors may disconnect households regardless of eligibility status, including households who were previously approved and who are now in arrears. You may issue additional crisis to already approved households who are now facing disconnect pending the availability of crisis funding for that particular household. Already approved households, however, may not use the American Rescue Plan Act funds in lieu of or as a complement to crisis funding. And we will have an entire module tomorrow on the American Rescue Plan Act funds and how those are used. So that, I think, will be a lot more clear to you after tomorrow afternoon's session. And LSPs may require client contributions for new applicants if the eligible benefit is insufficient to provide continuing service. Now, the application deadline for this year will be 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, May 16th, 2021. At that time, EAPCONNECT will no longer accept application submissions, and applicants may submit incomplete applications, but they will have a hard deadline of returning missing documentation by May 30th, 2021. All outstanding applications must have final eligibility determined and be placed into either approved or denied status by Tuesday, May 31st, 2021. And that's due to the Memorial Day holiday. You'll notice I do have an asterisk there. In the manual, I had May 30th as a date. And as I was typing up these slides, I realized that that's going to be Memorial Day. And it's unreasonable to expect everyone to have determined that final eligibility by by Friday the 27th in order to have it done in time for May 30th, especially when we give clients until May 30th to provide or upload all the documentation. So I actually already have made that change to the manual. I'm pending any other further changes, but I will be updating the manual and making that manual available online. In the meantime, you may mark these changes in the manual, in your copy of the manual if you wish. Another adjustment, all outstanding transmittals must be submitted to IHCDA fiscal by Monday, June 13th, 2021. And all vendors must be fully reconciled by Monday, June 27th, 2021. Both of those dates have actually been adjusted. I think giving you an extra 3 calendar days or so on each of them from what's in the manual. So please do note those changes. And again, we will be posting a new version of the manual. The official closing date of federal program year 2022 will be September 30th of 2022. So those are our operations timelines. Next, we'll talk a little bit about EAPCONNECT. We will have a full kind of overview of EAPCONNECT changes as our first session tomorrow morning. And then I do believe that Brad is planning on offering a standalone webinar going more in depth into those changes for a later date. So EAPCONNECT is Rowing's web-based interface, as I think we all know. So Rowing is aggressively making several large-scale enhancements for EAPCONNECT this year to make the environment easier to use for applicants, intake, and vendors. I do want to say, as an aside, recently has been noted that RIA has had intermittent difficulty downloading updated data upon startup. And it's also been noted that some of the work, if it's been done in RIA, it occasionally has not been visible to IHCDA through EAPCONNECT. I know there's been at least 1 or 2 instances during Renee's monitoring this year where there was some documentation apparently missing from the file. And then it turned out that that work had actually been done or uploaded through RIA rather than through EAPCONNECT. And Renee has actually been unable to see it in EAPCONNECT. So what I think, and Brad can maybe speak to this a bit more during his presentation, but I do believe that we're starting to see some of the early signs of that kind of loss of compatibility with Windows updates that we were talking about last year with RIA. RIA is a legacy piece of software at this point. It is worth noting that a lot of the enhancements, most if not all the enhancements that Rowing is working on this year are for EAPCONNECT only and will not be ported into RIA. RIA is officially no longer being updated or maintained. And so all LSPs should be fully transitioned to working solely out of EAPCONNECT at this time. And any LSPs who are still using RIA in any capacity must take immediate steps to shift their operations over to that web-based interface. And just to clarify, EAPCONNECT is the official database interface of record for this program year. So as I mentioned, Brad will be making a brief presentation on day 2 to provide a general overview of this year's EAPCONNECT enhancements, how they will impact your work, the applicant experience, and the vendor experience. Online applications will continue to be taken 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from any computer or internet-connected mobile device through the online portal. Agencies will be responsible to regularly monitor the online application portal for new applications, particularly for households in crisis, and to develop internal procedures to work online applications into their intake workflow. Online applicants are subject to the same rights and responsibilities as households who apply via any other method. And we are requiring that all subgrantees provide a link to the online application portal on their website in order to facilitate equity of access to this application method. And the link, I do want to note, should lead applicants to eap.ihcda.in.gov. I know that some agencies have been pointing to that page, and some agencies, I believe, have been pointing to the very direct link, which is, I think, like ihcda.rhsconnect.com or something along those lines. We would like everyone to actually point to our landing page, and there are a couple of reasons for that. From an agency communications policy standpoint, we actually do want the client to land on an IHCDA administered page that contains our specific branding. And the other part is that the IHCDA page, the IHCDA public-facing page there, that eap.ihcda.in.gov, does contain text with some of our rights and responsibilities disclosures, which are actually federally mandated. So by pointing people to that page, we are actually supplying that communication to them. Now, obviously, we can't control whether people actually read these disclosures or not, but the important thing, especially because there is a federal mandate, is that we are able to defensively say that we have provided access to these disclosures. So we do ask that if you're currently pointing to the RHS Connect page, that you do make sure that you're actually pointing to our internal IHCDA page, which will have a button at the top to take someone directly to the application. Subgrantee agreements. And so this is going to be a little bit confusing, and we'll talk about it, I think, a lot more in depth tomorrow when we go over our fiscal and budget and claims training. But basically, due to the forecast of gridlock in Congress, we are not likely to know our full PY 2022 funding until the spring of 2022. It's going to be a lot similar, I think, to what happened last year. So we anticipate beginning the year with a continuing resolution that will provide an equal amount of funding to 2021. However, we anticipate being able to begin the program year with a subgrantee agreement already in place using ARPA funds to subsidize all activities, and then using regular program year funds once ARPA has been depleted. So essentially, we are going to be, for lack of a better word, borrowing against ARPA in order to begin paying things out immediately. So last year, if you'll remember, we started out without subgrantee agreements in place because we were waiting for the official federal award. And then we actually had to, because that federal award hadn't come by November 1st, we actually had to delay the transmittals. Our goal for this year is to actually start everyone off with funds, with agreements in place by October 1st at the latest. We will be working closely with our financial operations teams, the subgrantee network, and rowing to make this process as smooth and easy to handle as possible. I'm sure many of you remember the reallotment award, and that did cause some difficulties and some confusion. But do note that one of the trade-offs of this arrangement may be some additional steps or more complicated processes for our aggregate reporting. So again, I know that the reporting was difficult during the year with that reallotment award. This is likely to be similar, but we're going to try to have better processes in place proactively to help you deal with that. Vendor MOAs. This is an MOA year. So our residential energy specialist, Gabe McFadden, has already been sending out hundreds of these MOAs to vendors. The MOAs will cover program year 2022 and 2023. Substantively, they are extremely similar to the previous MOAs. But we did include some additional language to clarify some of the clauses, including the handling of overpayments, refunds, benefit transfers, and client protections. We are continuing to do paperless MOAs whenever possible. So if you're aware of a vendor in your area that has not signed an MOA with us, please have them reach out to LIHEAP@ihcda.in.gov in order to have an MOA sent to them electronically for an electronic signature. And of course, as everyone remembers, we are still no longer entering into MOAs with wood vendors or other biofuel providers. However, you may develop your own MOAs in order to pay biofuel vendors directly using a voucher system, which would thus eliminate kind of the burden of either the agency cutting a check directly to the client, especially when they're in crisis, and also eliminates the burden of IHCDA creating that check and sending it out, and then the rigmarole of the applicant calling you or calling us and wanting to know where their check is. Transmittals, this guidance remains much the same as it had been before. IHCDA asks that transmittals be sent to vendors electronically. Avoid using regular mail to send the transmittals unless that is the only way a vendor can receive them, and ensure that you're notifying IHCDA of any of those exceptions. Most likely, those vendors should be ones who also had difficulty filling out the MOA electronically. But if you notify us that someone is refusing to accept an electronic transmittal and they have done an electronic MOA, then it seems like there might be some disconnect there. So we just want to work with the vendor to resolve that. I think the only real change we've made here is that we have converted business days to calendar days. We've been really trying to standardize that. So claims must be submitted to vendors within 14 calendar days of claim approval, whereas previously that read, I believe, 10 business days. And then once you receive the approval of a transmittal from the vendor, those transmittals should be corrected and sent to IHCA fiscal within 7 calendar days. And as usual, we do strongly encourage you, even though we do give you the 14 calendar days to transmit those claims to vendors, we strongly encourage everyone to adhere to a weekly schedule at minimum, just in order to make sure you have a good workflow and keep on top of those claims and get them to vendors and to us for payment in a reasonable time frame. Once again, this is a carryover from last year. Agencies are strongly encouraged to have a generic email address where they can accept documents, applications, and questions or requests for information. And if you do have that email address, we think it would be helpful for you to communicate that to the public in some way, whether you put it at the top of the application form with your contact information or on a cover page that you distribute with the application. But we will leave that as a recommendation at this time. We're not making that a requirement. And as a reminder, IHCDA does have a generic email for EAP. It accepts emails from agencies, from vendors, and from clients. We do ask you when you have a question to please use the IHCDA mailbox for everything that is not highly sensitive and needs to come directly to my attention. Anything that's in the EAP box can be accessed by myself, by Sam, by our customer service specialist, Liz, by Gabe, by Emily. So by sending it to LIHEAP@ihca.in.gov, you're actually able to send it so that it's accessible to everyone and not dependent on a particular person being in the office at any one time. The American Rescue Plan Act. So in early May, all LIHEAP grantees received a large award of supplemental LIHEAP funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. And this funding will expire on September 30th, 2022, so we have 1 year to spend it. In Indiana, ARPA will be used to provide 2 separate supplemental benefits. First, there's going to be a flat rate supplemental for all approved households. And we are also going to offer an arrearage benefit that will complement the crisis benefit. There will be a separate presentation on the administration of ARPA awards and the agreement. And once again, that will be tomorrow, I believe just before lunch. We'll be going over the ARPA presentation. Statewide application. We do have a new 2-page front and back application that is mandatory for all LSPs. We will also be providing a Spanish language version of the application as well as a larger print version. The Spanish language version and the large print version are not available yet, but I am working hard to have those available to you by September 13th. There is a 3rd page available as an attachment for households larger than 4 individuals, as well as instructions and a page of federally required disclosures of rights and responsibilities that must accompany the application form. And those are the same disclosures I talked about that are going to be on the ICDA public-facing EAP webpage. We do encourage fillable EAP applications to be made available. I am working on making fillable PDF versions of a lot of our forms. And I know some agencies have already mentioned that they that part of their process is to actually create those fillable versions themselves in-house. So for those who are able to do that, I do encourage you to do that. ICDA will be doing that for agencies who might not have access to a full version of Acrobat to make those fillable forms. But with all the other heavy lifting we're doing at the beginning of the program year, those might be a little bit delayed. So do be aware of that. Once again, we are allowing LSPs to fill out applications over the phone without obtaining client signature as long as notes are made in the statewide database. And note that the statewide application must have the subgrantee of records logo and contact information at the top of the application form. Dates. Dates are the same. I think the only change on this page is that I did change, as with everything else we're trying to standardize, I changed the the notification time for appointments from the 10 business days to 14 calendar days, just to standardize everything in calendar days. But you know, if anyone has face-to-face appointment, I'm sorry, then that eligibility determination and notification is due within 14 days of the appointment. And for any mail-in, and a mail-in, as a reminder, includes anything delivered to the agency by email, online application, by proxy, carrier pigeons, anything like that. That will be 55 calendar days from the receive date. For anything that was received prior to November 1st, this time frame is always going to start on November 1st when we actually have the start of the statewide program. So for instance, if you receive something on October 13th, you're actually going to count 55 days from November 1st, which will be December 26th. So for any of your early applications, December 26th is that date to keep in mind. I know. I know that timing is not great. And that basically for those early applications, you're going to want to try to work a little bit ahead. I'm really hoping that restoring the delay of applications going out to at-risk from when the online application opens to the general public will help you to kind of get ahead of all those early applications. I know that with the RIA enhancements and trying to work out all the details with the water program and having to coordinate that, you're not getting as much of a head start. You're not getting nearly as much of a head start as you normally do. I know that every year we say, oh, every year for the past 2 years or so, we've said, oh, this is a crazy year, but next year should be better. And the world and COVID-19 just have different plans for us. We've tried to be we've tried to make every effort to provide flexibility where we can, and to be good proactive partners with you. And I think we will continue to try to offer flexibility where we can. Basically, what we're asking is if you are having difficulty with this particular requirement, especially in the beginning, because we don't know what kind of numbers we're going to be seeing in terms of applications. I do know anecdotally, I have been getting, I think, more calls than I normally do during the downtime period between program years recently. So I'm thinking we may see an increase in applicants this year. Just be transparent with us, be communicative with us, and we will advise you on where we can provide flexibility. Emily and I are very open to working with you and being flexible. As everyone knows, the receive date is the date an application is received by the LSP. That is any signed application that has been where the application form has been completed, regardless of whether the application itself is complete with all required documentation. The application date in EAPCONNECT will be the date stamp on top of the application. In other words, that received date. The application enter date in EAPCONNECT will still be the date that the application was entered into the database, because as tied to actually creating the case in the database, that field is going to be non-editable. I don't know if I just created a word or not. And then the completion date will be the day that the application was completed. Now, we are going to be sure that in EAPCONNECT, that completion date is mandatory whenever the client has a claim pending. So in order for it to be approved, we're going to want that completion date to be filled in. And the completion date can be the same as the application date if the application was received with all needed documentation, or if the client turned in without all the documentation, but say you emailed them that day and they got you the documentation that same day. In that case, completion date might be the same as application date, but it can be noted that the completion date may very well be after the application date. The completion date can never be before the application date, nor can the completion date ever be after the date of an application approval or a claim date. Our guidance on closed accounts remains unchanged from last year. An EAP benefit can be applied to a closed account if the client received a pledge or benefit before the account was closed. However, an EAP benefit cannot be applied if the funds are pledged or transmitted to the vendor after a client has closed an account. And vendors may not apply EAP benefits to closed accounts with an outstanding balance. If you do have someone who has a final bill, they may still be able to get benefits on that account, as long as we have an assurance from the vendor that benefit will result in the account being reinstated and service continued at that service address of record. I know that there are times with vendors where maybe a client moved and they're trying to establish an account, the new address, and they need to pay off a final bill from a previous address first. I have had some success working with the vendors, and it seems like vendors since we've had this policy, I've kind of caught on to what we're trying to do, where the vendors in a lot of cases will work with us as long as they know that we are pledging on an account, where they will actually establish that account and roll those charges over to the next account. And then we're actually able to pay on the account at the address of record rather than paying on a bill for an address that the applicant no longer lives at. So try to work with your vendors on that if you encounter this situation. And if the vendor just isn't getting it or is not interested in doing that, just let us know and we can try to negotiate with them as well and just clarify what it is that we are asking them to do. And this is just an example on that previous existing policy. I'm not going to take the time to go over this because I know that we're starting to run fairly close to end, and I still have 20 some slides to go. Individual checks. LSPs should make every effort to have clients who receive direct payment benefits sign up for the ACH or direct deposit. It helps to expedite their benefit. It creates a little bit less burden for our program operations team, or financial operations rather. However, do note that this is not a requirement, and subgrantees should not be requiring people to provide ACH approval or direct deposit information. A reminder, because I know that this is a process I think got lost a little bit at times this year. If a biofuel client is in crisis and needs an immediate benefit, and the LSP does not enter into MOAs with biofuel vendors, then that LSP should be issuing the client an immediate crisis benefit and submitting the claim for reimbursement. So I know that we had a few clients this past year who had been calling repeatedly because they were out of wood, and their crisis check was actually submitted through the transmittal process rather than being issued immediately and then claimed for reimbursement later, which resulted in a client who was out of wood sometimes waiting up to 120 days for their crisis benefit, which obviously is not good mitigation. So we just want to be sure that we are being mindful of that. I do want to say, as an aside, I know that the system for entering those claims is a little unwieldy right now, and especially with the need to QA all those files. I am going to be working with financial operations and with rowing to kind of create some additional processes in how those vendor denotations are handled in EAPCONNECT, and maybe try to separate out the biofuel people from the utilities and rent people, even when it comes to the direct pay vendors, so that they can kind of go to different transmittals and you can better handle how you are handling those transmittals and getting those payments out. So that has not been done yet, especially with the CARES Act supplementals still being active. I didn't want to mess with the vendors too much right now, but I am going to have that in place. I would like to have that in place by the time, well, I guess by September 27th is going to be my deadline, since that is when the data entry can begin in EAPCONNECT. But yeah, we will be working on that, so please keep your eyes open for that guidance. All right, the administrative line item is going to continue to be 7.5%. We are not lowering that at all. However, do note that for program year 2022, that direct program expenses line item is going to be relabeled as outreach and eligibility determination. And we are going to give you an additional 2% on that line item. So you can go up to a 4.5% on your total award. And once again, to remind you, the admin, that 7.5%, that is tied to your total obligation, which means that if you budget the full 7.5% and you spend the entire 7.5%, but then you don't manage to obligate all of your benefits and all of your other line items, and you end up falling short, you might end up going over 7.5% in the end, and you might actually end up with a payback. And that is because that admin line item is a federal requirement, and the OMB actually requires that that it be tied to the total obligations and that it cannot exceed. However, the outreach and eligibility determination is just something that we have developed within IHCDA, is not tied to any federal requirements. And so we are able to actually just offer that to you as a percentage of your total award. It is not tied to your obligations. So even if you underspend on the rest of your grant, as long as you don't go over 4.5% of what we totally awarded you, there's not going to be any payback on that. As long as obviously during monitoring everything was charged appropriately and handled appropriately. And yeah, so we really hope that that extra 2% that we're offering this year proves to be helpful in administering the program. And we will talk a little bit more about kind of the ramifications of this during the presentations tomorrow. But I wanted to highlight that up front, that this is one of the changes that we're really excited to make. And we know that there have been some people in the network who have been advocating for a larger increase on that. And essentially, you know, we just don't want to make too big of a change at one time. So we're trying to adjust year by year to find where kind of the sweet spot is that will allow you to have the flexibility to administer the program effectively, while still providing robust, meaningful benefits to all of our applicants. All right, and finally, for the operations changes, the water program. So IHCDA will be administering a benefit for water and wastewater utilities through the Low Income Home Water Assistance Program, or LIWAP. Obviously, that is much like the weatherization, so we are not going to be using that acronym except for when we need to, because that is the official name of the grant. I believe internally we are just going to be calling it the water program. So the water program will run parallel to and will use much of the infrastructure of the Energy Assistance Program, and EAP will be providing categorical eligibility for the water program. The paper application form and the online application will provide all applicants with an option to apply for EAP only, water program only, or both. This was a federal requirement that we must not force people to apply for both, or to apply for one as a precondition for the other, which is why we are allowing people to opt out of EAP and only apply for water. But honestly, it is the same eligibility. If you see someone who's only applying for water and not applying for EAP, it's worth asking them why. It's worth encouraging them to apply for EAP, but ultimately we cannot require that. And additional training specific to the water program will be presented at a later date. I believe Ashley might have set that up already, or she might be setting that up very soon. So keep your eyes open for that as well. All right, on to our policy changes for program year 2022. First up, crisis benefits. So Beginning in program year 2022, when determining benefit for an approved applicant who is in crisis, the LSP is to consider the disconnection or reconnection amount and award crisis first to that amount, up to a maximum of $250 per utility. As many of you will note, that is an increase from last year's maximum of $200 per utility. And that does mean that it's a total of $500 in crisis per household. As per usual, unused crisis from one utility may not be waived from one utility to the other. And clients who heat with electric, as long as it is an approved electrical heating source and not a space heater, will be eligible for crisis of up to $500 because they will be able to get both the base electric crisis and the heating crisis. As per usual, crisis for bulk fuels and biofuels should be given upfront in order to assist with delivery and reduce administrative burden, regardless of the presence of an actual crisis. And clients may come back once after the initial application approval to use any crisis funding not used at the time of approval. Since we are giving those upfront to people with crisis and biofuels, that usually is just going to be people with metered utilities who are facing a potential disconnect after moratorium ends. Income calculation and eligibility. Please note that we will be having a more in-depth training focused on income and eligibility this afternoon after lunch. But what we're doing with the income and eligibility this year is that we are redefining it as the most recent 3 complete months prior to an application date or the most recent 13 weeks prior to an application date. What this means for you is we no longer have an option within the policy to count the current month as part of the income eligibility period, unless, because there's always exceptions, all adult household members receive income on a regular schedule. So this would be your fixed income, your people on your Social Security, SSI, any of those. And there are no additional pay dates for the remainder of the month. These exceptions must be documented in the client file and should be invoked only to avoid the burden of requesting additional documentation from the household. So I have an example here, and I can't see myself to see if I'm blocking anything, so I'm going to move out a little bit because I know this slide is very full. A household applies on November 18th. One household member receives Social Security and SSI at the beginning of every month, but the other household member is employed. Household member number 2 presents a pay stub for November 12th with a 2-week pay period. Because they will be receiving additional pay on November 26th, November is not a complete month. Therefore, the intake must consider income for August, September, and October in order to get 3 complete months. IHCDA will be providing a worksheet to streamline and automate calculation of the 13-week calculation method with the entry of just a few pieces of data from the most recent pay stub. All subgrantees may choose to pilot this method for the program year 2022 and provide feedback to IHCDA on whether this actually eases burden on applicants. That should be end intake. And fixed income issued on monthly schedule, such as SSA administered benefits, can continue to be calculated by multiplying the most recent benefit amount received by 3. The exception is if an applicant applies in the first 3 months of 2022 and presents a letter from SSA outlining a COLA that increases their monthly benefit. As long as the letter shows both the pre-COLA and post-COLA benefits, the intake is to count the appropriate amount of benefit for the appropriate months of the eligibility period. And once again, we will be going over this more in depth later this afternoon following lunch. Income calculation and eligibility. So the other change we made here is that income eligibility will be based on 60% of state median income only for all households. We will not be switching over to 150% of federal poverty guidelines. So based on a most recent SMI of a household of four of $86,578 per year, here are your income guideline limits for eligibility for households sizes 1 through 10. Further changes that we made to our income calculation policies this year. Self-employment with Schedule C will now be calculated based on line 5, gross profit, instead of line 7, gross income. Not everyone had a difference between line 5 and line 7, but for those who did, line 7 was always larger than line 5. So we're easing up a little bit on a slight overcorrection that we had made when we changed from going to adjusted gross income to gross. And again, we can talk about that a little bit more later today. And the drastic loss of income policy has reverted back to its pre-pandemic state, which basically means that the drastic loss of income policy rather, can be invoked for layoffs, plant closures, or I believe unexpected medical issues that render someone unable to work. We are no longer going to be taking reduction in hours as part of the drastic loss policy. However, we are going to continue to monitor the situation with regard to the spread of COVID-19. I know that numbers are going back up, and we're going to monitor the impacts on the economy and employment. We are kind of keeping the COVID-19 drastic loss of income policy ready to go in case we need to change this policy on the fly. Our application benefits with ARPA coming in this year is going to be changing somewhat this year. So when you apply benefits, and we will be going over this in much more detail tomorrow, but the first benefit to be applied will be crisis, followed by ARPA arrearage, followed by regular, followed by ARPA supplemental, followed by second crisis. I know that in a previous version of the manual, I'd included the local funding utility programs in this kind of application order, and I received some feedback on that, which some of it made sense. I was not intending to tell people how to use their non-ICDA administered funds, but what I was trying to do was to create a general timeline of what takes precedence, so that those local funding or utility programs can be awarded either before or after the regular and ARPA supplemental funding, depending on their own rules and guidelines. But the big thing that I want to stress is that they may not be applied before crisis and ARPA arrearage. Those really do need to be the first two that are applied to any outstanding balance. Our adult caregiver policy has changed. If an individual who provides care to an adult with a disability lives in the same household as the care recipient, regardless of whose domicile it is, or any familial or social relationship or lack thereof between the two individuals, both the caregiver and the care recipient will be counted as household members, along with whatever gets counted as actual household income. So any stipend that's received by the caregiver is intended to provide for the physical needs of the care recipient, and therefore that shall not be counted as household income. That essentially is considered a benefit for the care recipient, and would be excluded as income. However, any employment earnings received by the caregiver, including any actual salary or wages personally realized in the course of providing adult care or any outside employment, shall be counted as household income. Furthermore, any income received by the care recipient, such as Social Security or SSI, will be counted as household income as well. The previous policy was really vague, and really when we thought about it, we realized that if if there is a caregiver and a care recipient who are living in the home full time, they are both going to be contributing to energy usage. And so really, we should be able to consider their eligibility based on the increased income guidelines for 2 people instead of just 1. Heat included in rent, we made a small change to this. As you know, last year we did reduce, I believe, the dwelling points for people with heat included in rent to 0, just to better address the decreased energy burden of people who pay their utilities bundled with their rent. This year, we're making a further adjustment to that by also reducing the points for the primary heating fuel down to 0. So that will reduce a household's benefit by $50. Again, this is just to reduce or just to address the reduced heating burden of people who pay those utilities indirectly bundled with their rent versus households who pay a vendor directly for their utility service. It is our hope that by doing this, while we have the ARPA supplemental benefit for everyone, that this change won't really be felt by the household. Do note that this only applies to households in which the main heating source is included in the rent. So if the household heats with gas, but they pay their gas separately and the electric is included in the rent, this is not going to apply to them. Also, this is something that's come up a couple times this past year. Note that for households in which the installed primary heating source is an electric furnace or baseboard heaters, and the electricity is in the rent, the intake must indicate that the electricity is the primary heating fuel, and mark both electricity included in rent and heat included in rent within that statewide database. Basically, if you don't mark both, there's a good chance that EAPCONNECT might not handle the matrix correctly and might give them matrix points that they don't actually qualify for, which can lead to a benefit error, monitoring errors, and possibly federal reporting disparities when I submit my federal reports. In short, we must accurately record all conditions that exist and not assume that those connections will be made behind the scenes by the database. Wood and biofuels. All I did on this was update the crisis amount. They're eligible for $250 crisis. That crisis should be given up front and may not be waived to the electric utility. And just what we talked about earlier, that we are still not engaging in MOAs at ICDA's level, but the LSP may enter into an MOA with any reputable local vendors. And if a client is in immediate need of wood, the LSP may issue that check internally in order to satisfy the immediate crisis need, and then submit those claims for reimbursement. And we have 12 minutes left, so I'm going to try to speed through the rest of this. The confidential applications, this policy is unchanged. I'm not going to spend any time on this. You will be able to review the slide deck later, and this is also in the manual. Household eligibility versus benefit eligibility. Again, this is unchanged. We just want to make sure that we are kind of looking first at whether the household itself meets all of the general LIHEAP eligibility requirements. And once we determine that a household does, then we can look at the individual benefits. We should not be denying a household based on not submitting utility bill information, because ultimately that does not determine whether they are LIHEAP eligible. The LIHEAP eligibility is based on mostly on income, on the address documentation, on making sure that there's an eligible adult, their residency, things like that. The benefits, those come later. The utilities come later. All right, and finally, let's get into changes to forms in our last 11 minutes here. So first thing I did this year was I distinguished between appendices and forms in order to provide increased clarity. So essentially now they're separated out. Appendices are going to be informational in nature and are intended to supplement the content of the manual. Forms, meanwhile, are interactive and are for documentation purposes. All forms have been edited to indicate when they were last revised, so LSPs may ensure they always have the most current version. So what this means is everyone who's on this call, you should go back to your hard drives, your filing cabinets, anything that you have, and destroy any existing forms that you have on hand. Destroy your hard copies. If you have electronic versions, delete or archive those. You don't want to maintain any of those previous versions. You're going to want to make sure that they all have a revised date on them, and that revised date is at least, August of 2021. I think I put August of 2021 on all of them. I will clarify that later. There might be some that have a July date on them because I was working on them earlier. But whenever we do create a revision, I'll make sure those are available on the website, and I'll probably also try to maintain a list somewhere of the last revision date of all forms. So our appendices that we have this year, we're down to just six actual appendices. Appendix A is the list of manual changes. Appendix B is local service provider list. Appendix C is going to be the IHCDA community programs contacts. Appendix D is the federal LIHEAP statute. Appendix E is the moratorium legislation. And Appendix F is going to be your income calculation quick reference chart. Meanwhile, forms, I've tried to be a little bit more make the form name kind of describe what it is. This isn't the most elegant solution, and I'm open to changing this in the future. But our forms, we have a declaration of absent household members form, an address change form, EAP and water application forms. Both we have a regular Spanish and large print versions. Once again, the Spanish and large print versions will be coming next month. Direct benefit payment election form, disability medical statement, the DWD release of information, request for earnings information, energy benefit transfer request, the ERR checklist, ERR consent and release of liability, the income verification affidavit, the landlord affidavit, the benefit matrix, the simplified recertification tool, and the utility affidavit. First up, let's talk about the address change form. So this is to be completed by any approved applicant if they move after benefit determination. And I know that this is a new process that not all applicants might be proactive about. So I think we are going to try to put some language on the website about this. And we do encourage all of you, when you're talking to your applicants, to let them know if they move during the program year after they apply, to let you know and request this form so that we can properly document everything. This will allow the applicant to update their address, their heating utility information about their new home, and to notify the LSP of any outstanding benefit balance to be transferred. With the introduction of this form, the EBTR form has changed to become entirely LSP and ICDA facing, rather than requiring the applicant to fill out anything on that. Statewide application form. I have updated the CSBG report module for reporting characteristics to make sure it matches, I believe, all of the requirements. I know that over the past few years, we've been moving toward that, and it's always kind of fallen a bit short. Pretty sure I got everything this year. I've added a space for the mobile phone carrier to be reported to help sign people up for text updates. I've tried to reorganize the application to improve the flow. Your mileage on that may vary. I'm pretty pleased with how it flows now. Added the option to apply for the water program or to opt out of EAP and apply only for water. I have created application instructions paired with those federally mandated disclosures of applicant rights and responsibilities. Create an attachment page for listing members and households larger than 4 members. And as previously noted, we will be providing Spanish language version and larger print versions. Direct benefit payment election form. This is going to eliminate the ACH form. So this is to be completed by any applicant who is eligible to receive a direct benefit payment. So that would be people with utilities in the rent, households that heat with biofuel, or households who use a utility that has declined to enter into an MOA with IHCDA. And so basically it gives people their options on how they would like to receive their benefit. And if they would like to receive it by ACH, they can put their ACH information right there on that form. So it handles our documentation that we have asked them how they want to receive their benefit, and that we've collected the ACH information for those who opt for the direct deposit. Request for earnings information has been updated, really kind of de-updated. It's been restored to its pre-CARES Act design in order to comply with the current policies. So we no longer ask about whether there's been a reduction in hours and how many hours they're working now versus before the pandemic. But again, we do still have that form on file, so if we need to change it again, we can do so pretty quickly on the fly. Energy benefit transfer requests. With the introduction of the applicant-facing address change form, which gathers updated utility information and asks about any remaining benefit balance that the client may be aware of. This is now an internal form for IHCDA and the subgrantee. And use of the new EBTR form will help IHCDA staff to better track the status of EBTRs and be able to provide better updates to the LSP upon request. I'm going to be working with program accounting to get a workflow in place on this. And there is a spot on it for them to sign off when it's been done, so that we should be able to tell you pretty definitively, hopefully, as long as this process works, that an EBTR has actually been processed. So fingers crossed, right? And finally, simplified recertification tool. So I have overhauled this to provide the applicant with more robust guidance on how they might qualify for simplified recertification. I do want to note that IHCDA is still evaluating the net benefit to both the household and the LSP intake staff in terms of burden reduction of actually using this policy. I know that I've heard some fairly mixed feedback from many people in the agency. So if any LSP feels that this policy actually increases the burden either on the household, the intake, or both, then I want you to know that you can submit that feedback to IHCDA and opt out of offering simplified recertification this year. All right, so we are at 2 minutes until 11:15, so I actually managed to get through all that on time. So with that, I know that Dave Stewart is going to be coming up after our short break. Dave is always Dave's fraud, waste, and abuse training is always a good time, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to go ahead and since we don't really have time to take any in-depth questions, I'm just going to go ahead and let us go to break a couple minutes early. Again, we'll have a question and answer session at the very end of the day today. Thank you all for bearing with me through that. I know I had to kind of speed through. That was a lot of slides. The slide deck will be sent out to all participants. I want to say by Thursday, but I might get them out today. We'll see. All right. I will see everyone in 16 minutes. Thanks, everyone.